Thanks very much. Thank you. So just a quick introduction. In my day job, I'm a professor at Ryerson University, and usually I get the audience's attention when I say, this will be on the final exam, so you can take notes. So we're delighted to be here. We'll go through some quick introductions shortly, but I want to say that first, we all want good health care and good health outcomes because it affects each one of us and it affects all our families. Essentially, we want to live longer, we want to live better, and the question is, at what cost? So how much are we willing to pay for this? I want to give you 3 points. This will be on the exam, and then we'll go through the intros. We spend a lot on healthcare. In Canada, it's about 11% of our GDP, 11%, and it's $6,300 per person. So it's not cheap, but when you need it, it's wonderful, I believe. It's growing at about 2.7% per year, 2.7%, slightly more than the rate of inflation, but it is growing. It's complex, it's doctors, it's hospitals, it's medicine, it's all sorts of things, and it will increasingly consume our money, but we'll live longer and we'll be healthier, so that's good. But the sleeper is the aging demographics. We're all part of it. For the first time this year, StatsCan acknowledged that we have more old people, more seniors, than we have young people, and that's a problem because young people pay the bills for the old people to retire on. So there are more people over 65 than there are people under 14. That's a problem, and the over 65 crowd is growing at about 20%. So healthcare spending may grow, or there's pressure on it to grow. Hospital care is very intensive and very expensive. This is the third point. Hospital care is great when you need it, but it's the least efficient way to give health to us. Home care is a far better, or care where you are, wherever that may be, but not in a hospital, is the most cost-efficient way to do it. And that's going to be the topic of discussion, enhancing patient care through technology-enabled caregivers. So let me introduce the four gentlemen. I'm going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves, what they do, and what their organization does. So on my left is Roy French. So Roy?
Good morning. My name is Roy French. I'm the CIO of St. Elizabeth Home Care, not hospital. We have approximately 9,000 field staff that are totally mobile. They provide care in your home. We have nurses, personal support workers, rehab therapists. And we provide approximately 26,000 home care visits per day. We are on I'd say about our fourth iteration of mobility in terms of technology. And the nurses and support workers do a lot of their formerly paper functions at the point of care using technology today. We do a great deal of work with First Nations community across Canada. And about 2 years ago, we launched a brand called Eliz, which really focuses on caregivers. To Ron's point, we call it the silver tsunami. Is 1 in 4 people today are caregivers for elderly parents or siblings. And by 2020, 1 in 3 people will be caregivers for elderly parents and family. So we are also focusing heavily on that aspect of the business.
Thanks. I'm going to ask Deepak to introduce himself.
My name is Deepak Gandhi. I'm the VP Enterprise Solutions at MPOYNT. We are a managed services enterprise mobility solutions provider. Everything that Roy mentioned, we're sort of the back engine behind the scenes to actually help build and sort of support that infrastructure behind the scenes.
And Dave is next.
Yeah, and I'm Dave Speedie, the Director of IT for CarePartners, and similar with Roy, we have about 4,200 field workers spread out throughout Ontario, providing the same type of services, personal support workers, nurses, and therapists, and have a lot of the same challenges as St. Elizabeth and Circle of Care.
Thanks. And Vin?
I'm Vin Singh. I'm head of IT at Circle of Care. We're affiliated with Sinai Health Systems, so we see the end-to-end, I guess, so we're starting to see the end-to-end in terms of how the patients move from hospital acute to the community and vice versa. So there's a lot of challenges there, as we all know here, similar aspects. We're a smaller agency. We're a not-for-profit. We're doing about 20,000 visits a week, and we've got a mobile force of about 1,400 out there, and volunteers and personal support workers and nurses.
This is good, so thanks. So I'm going to moderate a discussion. It's a panel, and I've got three, again, for the exam, three major topics, but I'm going to ask you on each one of these if you have any questions, but I'll tell you what they are now. First, we're going to talk about big issues. What are the projects, what are the activities, what are the rollouts, what are the products, what are you doing today, and it's going to have an impact very soon. Second, what are the challenges, the difficulties, whether it be politics, whether it be funding, whether it be government, whether it be end users perhaps. What are the things that make it difficult to do what you need to do? And the third topic, which is I think the most interesting, what does it look like in the future? What are the opportunities? 5, 10 years when, gray tsunami, did you say that? Gray
Silver.
tsunami, you said it,
Silver.
okay. We'll all get there, hopefully. The other option's not very good. So you hope to be old someday and on the recipient of this technology-enabled healthcare, home care. So I'll start with the first one, and gentlemen, Roy, I'm going to say to you first, what are the big issues that you're working on right now? Big topics.
Oh dear, we don't know that long. Right now we're in the midst of refreshing our entire mobile fleet. And when you're dealing with that amount of staff, the logistics are quite daunting. These nurses, we don't have an office. So scheduling, trying to get them to the local McDonald's, Tim Hortons, church halls, church basements is where we actually do all this. And that's making the switch over from the existing devices to the new fleet of devices. One of the big challenges we have with that, and many of you probably face the same, is currently, we started this journey about 2.5 years ago. I have 4 different operating systems out there in the field, 4 different versions of Android. And every time we get a new device from Samsung, there seems to be a new operating system on it, which requires a huge amount of regression testing for us. And that's very problematic, and that's where quite often we'll use Deepak and his MPOYNT services to help us through that. So that's really the big focus for us right now. The other thing is that much of home care in Canada is still very much paper-based. And what we're trying to do as fast as humanly possible is to automate the collection of data. And that will enable us to get good clinical outcomes. Because right now, if we want to do any sort of analysis in certain areas, we just have to get the paper charts from the patient's home, and someone's got to key in all that data, and then we have to analyze it. So it drives standardization by forcing the rigor of answering questions on the tablets. A wound is not partially pink, slightly pink, could be pink, dark pink. No, it's pink. So it makes it simple to actually do some of those analyses. So those are 2 of the big things that we're really focused on right now.
You can ask Deepak from your experience at St. Elizabeth, but other clients as well.
Sure.
What are the big issues?
I think getting operational buy-in has always been problematic in most organizations, but I think they're starting to see the value prop and the business need of being able to enhance that end user experience because it directly correlates with patient care, right? And trying to consolidate systems. And Vin can speak to his platform a little bit more in detail, but I think just getting buy-in overall, like the executive level and operation level, because at the end of the day, nobody wants to go out and actually cause any ripples in the field, right? Any downtime, again, affects the time that you could be out there delivering patient care. So advocating that information and sort of communicating that to leadership to get buy-in. Also having sort of forward-thinking individuals driving that conversation, whether it's an external party or internal, leveraging that in a clear, concise manner to get buy-in to be able to roll this out in a timely manner.
Great, thanks. Dave, do you agree, or other issues?
Yeah, no, totally agree. We're actually finishing up a project where we deployed the mobile app to the devices where the PSW specifically can go in and see what their daily care is. And that, like you were saying, Roy, that's a challenge because we're going out to the branch, spending lots of time training and bringing staff in, which is they're in doing training, but they're not out actually serving the client. And the other big project we're going to be tackling is the data, because we have all this data, and what can we do with that data?
That's interesting. I've got some questions about that. Go ahead, Vin. What's in your world?
Yeah, very similar in terms of the mobile side. The other aspects that we always have challenges is change management, as everybody over here, I'm sure everybody has to tackle that. Not just change management as an overall, but the difference in the younger generation
Yeah,
to the older.
yeah.
There's a divide there. We have the older folks that I like it the way it is. I don't want to move from here, and if you do changes, I'm out of here kind of mentality. Whereas the younger ones saying, you know what, go faster. So,
Yeah.
and managing both ends. And to give you an idea, we about 4 years ago we went with a VoIP system where we can check in, check out. We actually had our personal support workers, about 50 of them just resign because they did not want to check in using the phone. They didn't want to learn it. They just said, okay, I'm out of this industry altogether. So that's the kind of issues that you constantly face
Yeah.
with healthcare.
So let me put a footnote there. So everybody uses healthcare. You have no choice. And the older you get, perhaps the more you'll use. I've noted that doctors are the least advanced technologically sometimes. I've done some work with a telco, and they tell me that pagers are alive and well because doctors will not give up pagers because they love them and they've used them for so long.
Yeah.
But the world is changing. I'm going to ask you in just a second, are there any questions you might have about big issues in your personal life, your professional life, your family's life that you see about home health care? But I want to pick up who owns the data. So I think, Dave, you said, managing the huge volume of data. Does it belong to your organization? Does it belong to the patient? How do you manage that?
Yeah, and that's one of the ways we're going to look at it as well. Like, we have all this data, but where can we actually use the families, get the families engaged and
Yeah.
looking at that data as well? So we can help, help the families can help schedule those appointments or those visits, and what can the families do to help augment that extra cost in healthcare.
And are they receptive? Similar to Vin's comment, are the maturing families, are they receptive to having you and the devices and the personal support worker providing that data and working with them? Or?
From our earlier conversations, that's what seems like the families want. They want access to that data, access to see when the PSW or the nurse is going to come into the home and actually help do that scheduling.
Okay, so on your remote device or your Apple Watch, you can tell if somebody has been to visit your parent or somebody that you're taking care of, and what the results were, and do they take their meds. I face this in my family. Again, it's something that when you're away, you don't know what's happening. So if I knew that I'd be able to sort of say, okay, what happened today, I'd be happy. I'd pay for that, I think. But questions from you or issues that you see in your life or in this industry? Yes?
We also want data to flow from the hospital system to the long-term care or other services and back and forth. So the patient, for the continuity of care, not to have to repeat.
Perfect. Yeah.
I think it's important that we look at that bilateral.
Yeah. So a patient, perhaps starts in a hospital. Again, I'll speak of my mother, who goes to the hospital regularly, but then she comes home and then she goes back to the hospital. And it would be good to be able to see that continuum of experience so that the next care, the doctor, the PSW, whatever, knows what happened over the last couple of days. Can anybody speak to that? Sure, Vin.
Sure, yeah. A part of the challenge with all of that is privacy. It's huge and it's rampant the way it's administered from one end to the other. And I'll give you an example. There's an assessment done in the home by CCACs, which are contracted to do, to give us, agencies like us, the funds to provide personal support. The client gets an assessment done, and they have the right to say, I don't want to share this with anybody. And right away, it's locked and it doesn't flow through. And some clients, or many clients, are afraid to give, especially if there's an assessment to do with mental, cognitive abilities and so forth. They'll just say, I don't want to share this with anybody. And right away you have a breakdown of what can be provided. That being said, there is systems like Connecting Ontario right now that's going into effect. We're on it right now, for example, at the end user, where we can see all of the lab results, the discharge informations and so forth, directly from our systems. We're connected through single sign-on through our ERP, which is in-house. So that's making a huge difference, but that's just starting to filter out. And it's for the community side, it's a one-way feed right now. We cannot put information back in to help. I've been on a panel with a Central Lynn. I've been fighting for that. So soon we'll hopefully get to have a bilateral feed into that system, which will be fantastic. Yeah.
So another comment, go ahead.
Do you have a feed-in from CCAC?
Yes, yeah.
We can, when patients present in our emergency departments, we send out a ping, and if there's a match that they
Yes, and there is that, but exactly, yeah, as long as they've signed off and so forth. But the actual feed for regular information about that's all pretty good through, they have various referral systems, HRM and so forth, RM&R, but it's the more private data that's still a hit and miss. There's a repository of assessments. It's the IAR that holds it across Ontario. So anyways, I'll stop here, but yeah.
So it's so my interpretation technologically, and I'm a technology guy from it's all possible, it's all feasible, but it's the legislation, privacy laws, and then the receptivity or the attitude, so to speak, of the individual or the families or the organizations as to whether this is a good thing or not. And one thing I will observe from my father-in-law, they get more curmudgeonly, they get more stubborn as they get older, which is not a bad thing, I guess. But I'm going to use this as a segue to the next topic, which is, what are the challenges or the difficulties? And I'm going to footnote security is probably one of the big ones. But would you like to start off, Roy? Are you okay?
I was sharing with someone this morning that the St. Elizabeth board have taken an inordinate interest in me over the past couple of years. For the first part of my career, they just ignored me. But cybersecurity has really become a hot topic in, I think, all boards these days. And so I have to go and present to them about, what the state of the industry is, what threats are presenting themselves, and then what are we doing as an organization to secure ourselves, or to make sure we're as secure as possible from external threats. And we have, over the past year, implemented a significant amount of new technology and new tools to help us try and prevent this. But the statistics are daunting. One of the things I shared with the board is that the industry average for successful phishing attempts is about 16% of your employees will give up their credentials. So it's something that we just have to constantly stay on top of.
Sure.
I'll just add to Roy's point. I think it's critical to be able to have the systems in place for redundancy purposes to make sure that end users don't fall for those. But I think education is a big aspect of that. Having that open line of communication. The more educated your end users are, the better security posture you'll be able to enforce. And again, from an industry which is fairly driven by non-technical users, there has to be a lot of emphasis being put on current landscape. Hey, this is the do's and don'ts. This is something that you should be looking out for. And as you start to roll out new technologies, that's in your interest, right? You're going to benefit immensely of being able to educate that end user to understand, hey, these are the changes. This is how it's going to be implemented. This is what you need to look out for, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. David, it doesn't have to be security, but what are the big issues? And if it is security, by all means.
Well, security is definitely one. That's one thing we've been working over the last couple of years is with the staff is education. Don't just automatically click on that email that you get in, but also some other challenges for us is the skill set of the staff. Like it's a challenge. You talk about older and younger, and you'd be surprised that the older PSW or nurse may be more technical than the younger person because they just haven't had that technology in their family life. So it's a challenge to design that training and ensuring that technology is easy enough so that they understand it.
But also, you can't necessarily have a fragmented user experience across two different user groups.
No.
From an IT perspective, that's ludicrous to support. So you have to find a common ground in between, and by educating and having that open line of communication, you're able to do that, right? So it's having them trained, educated is one thing, but I think it has to be a two-way street, right? So you guys can drive that experience and that adoption rate. Otherwise, this technology that we're all trying to build and support and secure and compartmentalize in a way, say, hey, here you go. No one's going to use it.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So,
Good point. Vin, what do you think? Big issues?
There's just so many, but I'll label one of them. Aside from the ones already been talked about, we as an agency have data issues, and I'll say that broadly. Clean data is a commodity. And we collect tons of data now between all the devices and everything else. But in order to automate, to use AI, use all of that stuff, you need consistent, clean data to get stuff out. So we're actually using now in the back end, for give an example, BI stuff, that we're actually churning data about the visit times, when they were supposed to happen, when they're actually happening, and that's going to start feeding back into the coordinator saying, hey, you're booked, you're scheduling all this wrong. This client consistently gets a 20-minute delay time, so why don't you schedule it that way or have a conversation?
Yeah.
So we're actually starting to use or starting to think about that. I actually ran some reports on that, and that's huge. And I think we've got buy-in now from across the board saying we need to clean up all of this, and that's starting to happen, which is great.
I've actually seen some health organizations with data scorecards. You know, what's the quality of our data today? It's like the weather, you know, what's the quality of the air that we're breathing, but data's good. I want to, before I ask audience questions, but internal, external, not outsourcing necessarily, but maybe relying on external for data or for security. Is that something that's a challenge for you, or is it, no, sure, go use whatever? Anybody?
No challenge for us.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we do it every year, and it's part of the report that we give to the board, is we bring in a cybersecurity consulting firm to do a pen test, an external and internal. So at least we have so you know, my security guys tell me this is how secure we are. It's always good to have a third party come and validate those results.
Insurance policy.
Insurance policy. Gentlemen, internal, external, is it an issue or not an issue?
Go ahead. You want to go first? Or?
Go for it.
Oh, okay. I have two thoughts on that. Security, I do internal, but we do OpEx model for going forward, because the yearly, or want to pen test today, and that it becomes a huge ask to say another 15 or 20 grand. We just did an OpEx model for the next 5 years with a company. And
Operating expense.
yeah, just every month we dish out 3 or 4, whatever it is, and then we get all the pen testing for 5 years on different aspects. So whether it's you're doing data analysis on your data services or a pen test on your applications or your mobile apps, it's all within an OpEx model now, which is far easier for finance to figure out.
Yeah,
So,
capital expenses are difficult.
yeah, and so, but internally, we do all of our software development in-house, because I just feel that in the environment that we're in within Ontario anyways, there's just not enough out there, not enough diversity for software.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Dave, comment, or we'll go to
Yeah,
the
no,
crowd?
very similar. We have some security in-house that we manage, but we also rely on a partner.
Okay, that's the theme that's going to come out. Again, some research that I'm doing. No one organization can do it by themselves. Certainly they have to buy products, but more often than not they need service, support, skills, which are rare, especially data analytics or BI type skills. But there's this balance within the healthcare community that this is life or death information, and I really don't want to give it to somebody unless I 100% trust them, because I'm on the line for things that go right or wrong in various aspects of my business, and the vendors have to be there as well. Questions about challenges? We've talked about security, privacy. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Particular on privacy, what are your best practices for ensuring that people who need access to data have it and no one else does?
Yeah. Best practices?
Well, what's best practices? What have you found effective?
Yeah, what works?
Well, for us, we went through a whole restructure all our file servers, our data, to make sure that people have access that only need access. So that took a while, and just using like Active Directory and creating the proper security groups and making sure that if people move jobs or anything like that, they're removed and only the right people have access. So it took a while, but we need to do that.
And then keeping it fresh and current, I would
Exactly.
imagine. Yeah. But hang on, others respond? Yeah.
Go ahead,
I'll
Vin.
pitch in. We went from a user-centric model to a complete role-based model, and find that because there's so much people moving around, what you find is a noodle soup of mess of provisions, which is most agencies will have probably 60% or 80% over-leveraged accounts, and that's what we found has been a headache. So we haven't finished yet, but it's all going to be role-based. Once a person moves, you just move their role, and that's all they get.
Go ahead.
And just to add to Vin and Dave's point, role-based is pretty much a simpler way to do it, and it makes sense. But actually integrating with your existing ERP systems, et cetera, and we talked about that, Vin, where if there's an action made where, say, there's a subset of users that belong to this geographical location, they get plugged, they move to another geographical location. Now they have access to different data resources, et cetera. It's as simple as a change in ERP to their region, to their profile. It automatically kicks off your backend system to actually deploy those specific data resources to that individual based on that location. There's no real IT interaction required, and your compliance metrics are still being met. You're still controlling who has access to what in that way, single sign-on, et cetera, et cetera. Like, the user experience does not lag. Everything is automated behind the scenes, and that's sort of the BI sort of tool that allows you to kick off that process.
Yeah. I'm going to switch to the last one. You really want to ask it?
No, it's not a question. I'm just going to throw in. I
Sure.
went to a hospital, and historically we've had very restricted access. But we've recently done some analysis and found that it's actually negatively affected our patients because not all the information isn't always available.
Oh, yeah.
So we're looking at a more open model now, and we've canvassed a bunch of hospitals in Ontario, and about 40% of them seem to be moving towards a more open model. But what it's going to mean for us is we're going to have to increase the resources we put into privacy, into auditing, because we're really,
Bingo.
once you give the access, there's an onus there to monitor it.
Yeah, we're all nodding our heads here. We have no choice but to spend more time and money on privacy.
Well,
But
I think you hit up. This is a critical component. Like, we talk about user experience, but patient engagement is a big component of this, right? So one of our clients is Ronald McDonald House Charities, right? Say my child, knock on wood, God forbid, she's there receiving care. I don't live in close proximity to sick kids. Now, I still need to be connected. Say there's an emergency, I go down there. We have tablets fitted out in the family rooms that allow them to be able to have access to data. That's part of the patient experience, because I'm there, I'm still connected, I'm still close to my child who's receiving care, but at the same time, I'm still not disconnected from what I need to do on a day-to-day level. Similarly, if I'm a patient, I need to be, if I want to get access to social media applications, et cetera, you can, but your AP infrastructure has to be able to support that, right? So patient engagement is a critical component of this next step, especially in your environment. I strongly believe that.
yeah, let me shift. We got 5 minutes and then we eat, but it's important. But this is the fun part. What are the interesting things, the opportunities? The 5 years, 10 years. We all live that long. I hope so. We'll start again, Roy, with you. But what are the interesting things coming up in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think our healthcare system is not sustainable as it stands, I believe. And I think more emphasis has to be placed on home care. People heal faster in their homes. They feel better in their homes. We have launched a number of projects in Ontario with hospitals, especially around cardiac care. When a patient is onboarded onto the hospital systems, they're automatically onboarded onto ours. When they're discharged from hospital, one of our staff will go home with them. And then we use a variety of daily visits and virtual visits with remote patient monitoring software to actually look after that patient for the 30 days after discharge. Now, we've 1 year now into the program, we've reduced the hospital stay by 2 days, and we have significantly reduced the readmission rate of the patients back into the hospital. Because prior to this, when a patient was discharged, the next time the hospital would know anything about them is if they ended up back in emergency. So we've been able to intervene, because I'm feeling pains in my chest. Okay, that's fine, we can handle you or walk you through that, rather than you calling 911 and an ambulance back to the hospital. I think that's more of the model that we're going to see in the future.
Responsive healthcare and lowering the costs as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd say visibility.
Okay.
Both sides. I know the comment that was made to be able to have a centralized sort of repository where numerous healthcare providers, whether it's in the hospital or home care, can pull from. I think having visibility from a patient perspective of what's actually being spent and what's being provided and what's the next step of that care, having them more in the now and in tune with what's, what kind of care is available to them, and having some options around that, right? In Canada, we're fairly regulated where, you're gonna get this. You don't have a lot of choice. But as a consumer, I'd like to be able to, I'd like to be able to have that choice to receive the care that I want to. So, like, for example, Vin, your application where I can rate my caregiver and say, hey, similar to if you have an Uber driver saying, coming in, you give them 5 stars, 3 stars based on experience that you received through through my care, I would like to be able to, give a rating to this caregiver and say, hey, I didn't like this person. Maybe I want to receive a different person. I want to put that patient in that driver's seat. I think through that visibility, that's going to be the next step in evolution.
You're bringing up an interesting topic. This is for
Sure.
sure a lunchtime discussion. Dave, what's your thought?
Well, what we're really excited about is the fact of, at some point, letting the patients determine what kind of care they want and
Okay.
when they come in, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Customer-driven,
I agree. It's
patient-driven.
going to be access to care when it's convenient for yourself and not when it's convenient for somebody to give it to you.
That's
right?
interesting.
So very, very important. But accessibility, managing our home care or health care you have to understand the system to navigate it right now. So if you're in the healthcare space, you know where the supports are, but if you're not, it's really difficult, and especially if there's a language barrier. So somehow through an application, through a website, or whatever it is that we got to do in the future for healthcare, we have to be able to make it easier for people to navigate. That's
This is
a huge,
excellent.
huge
I
thing.
look forward to being sick and oldly and sick. But do you have any questions or comments on this topic? Yes.
Right here. Could you say your name and company, please?
Oh, it's Ray from Ontario Telemedicine Network, and I know about the remote patient monitoring things that you're saying, and my parents are now a consumer of your service, so I totally get it. And as a quarterback for their healthcare, I see a lot of areas for improvement, but there is cameras and other things that you can look at to resolve your issue. What kind of paint they can take pictures. Things of that nature. One of the things that I said to a caregiver was, when you stop the service for a couple of months, they have to do a reassessment. I said, couldn't you just video in? I can show you my mom. Things of this nature, I think, things that you can take into your organization for future improvement, for the technologies that are out there as we get into telehome.
Yeah, I think one of the issues we face today is that in Ontario and maybe in other parts of the country, the mindset is it's fee for service. A nurse has to show up at your door before they get paid, or a PSW. Our funders haven't really wrapped their heads around how to pay for a virtual visit, or what a virtual visit is worth. Yes.
There actually is a fee for an email consultant for physicians.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. We had another question over there. Name and...
My name is Peggy, and I'm from Caesars Windsor. But prior to Caesars Windsor, I worked with clinical research. One of the questions that I have to this group is, are you looking at that aggregate data and taking a look at it from a research standpoint, and is that data being disseminated?
We're not using it from a research perspective, but we're using it for analytics to figure out how to serve our clients better in the future. But we're not right now, unfortunately, doing a lot of research on that.
And I'll kind of add to Vince's point, and I believe Brian and Patty were talking about this actionable results, quote unquote. I think there's a lot to be said in healthcare specifically because margins are very limited. Everyone's kind of, fighting for this pie. I think looking at data to look at cost savings more so that driving revenue is where you can really maximize on that data. And I see a lot of sort of those patterns when we're working with these organizations that this data is relatively available, it's current. How can we, look at this data where, you can leverage certain solutions where we can equip a tablet with certain monitoring for that end user to get that data as opposed to throwing out a nurse to go out and visit that client, right? So there is that data, but I think it's just gonna take more time for that to mature a little bit further to drive and directly correlate to the revenue aspect.
Yeah, so just another side note, we're using a lot of the data from a perspective of workforce engagement as well with clients. So there's a lot of possible issues when you have a mobile workforce. Everybody is aware of that. How do you guarantee that worker was there at that point in time? So for example, our apps are checking that data against what it's supposed to be, geolocation, so forth, whether we're using other technologies. We've got 4 or 5 different feeds to ensure that visit happens when it's supposed to happen, and was the client given what they were supposed to give. And those are the main things that we're looking at. We want to ensure that our clientele is getting what they're supposed to get when they're supposed to get it. Yeah.
Questions further? And I'm going to wrap up by saying this is an important topic, and I think it's interesting as well. Again, it affects all of us, our health and the health of our families. I hope you all come back next year, because this is a topic that we might want to revisit, because the technology is there. There's no doubt, and the technology is getting more affordable, more ubiquitous, tipping point sort of thing. But it's the people, the organizations, the attitudes, I think, that require, and laws perhaps, that require modification, because we're not going to go backwards. So, Phil, any final words to close it up?
Well, now that you've figured out the Canadian healthcare system, could you help us a little bit south?
Let's give an applause to this panel, folks. Well done.